I want to remind everyone to download, rate, and subscribe to the 415ers podcast. 5 stars are appreciated. Evan Giddings and Marc Grandy with you, as always, 3 times a week. Odyssey Sports Podcast Network, 95.7 The Game. All right, we've taken a lot of time talking about the running back, the number one option on the 49ers. But we talked about off the top, at least I did, the quarterback position for San Francisco and how Jimmy Garoppolo has been, I think, in a way, also part of saving the 49ers season. But is he going to be a part of the future? Now, this is a question and a topic that is going to get much louder should the 49ers continue to do what they have done over the last 3 weeks, which is win. And Jimmy G coming back, like I know we've talked about it ad nauseum over this podcast. The plan is for Trey Lance to just slot right in back to being the starting quarterback at the end of this season, upcoming for next year. Well, I don't know about that, Mark. Now, I don't know if Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the starting quarterback for the 49ers next season, because while his value to the Niners increases each time he wins a game, each time he plays well, which he has, throwing 15 touchdowns and 4 interceptions since he started in week 2, his price tag also continues to go up. And you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that there were a lot of teams that right now are regretting not signing Jimmy Garoppolo. The Panthers, maybe Washington, although they've sort of turned it around. Maybe a team they're seeing this week in the Saints, because Andy Dalton is now their backup and now forced into starting action. There's a lot of teams that could use a service of Jimmy Garoppolo. And with how he's playing right now, Mark, there might be some questions that need to be answered at the end of this season. So what is the future of the quarterback position? Are you still firm that it is going to be Trey Lance heading into next year?
I think that's still the most likely scenario, just considering the money. And now if there's still a lot of season left and things can change, but you consider the way Jimmy Garoppolo is playing, you consider all the quarterback needy teams that we've already mentioned. I think you can throw in the New York Jets to that list. Just before we sat down to record, it was reported that officially Robert Saleh has decided to not start Zach Wilson this week. So, I mean, that could potentially be a team as well. And Robert Saleh, head coach of the Jets, former defensive coordinator of the 49ers, knows Jimmy Garoppolo very well, and I would assume is a big fan of Jimmy Garoppolo. You start to look at maybe what might the number be for Jimmy Garoppolo, and I would guess it's probably close to 30 million. It's probably upwards of 25 million a year. I mean, Ryan Tannehill is being paid $29 million a season. I think Jimmy Garoppolo deserves right around that same level, if not maybe a little bit more. I think Jimmy Garoppolo has proven with his play so far this season, and again, a lot can change over the next handful of weeks and into the postseason. But I think Jimmy Garoppolo deserves to be paid at the same level as Ryan Tannehill. So that's a really large number. And then when you consider the fact that the 49ers, their stars, their payments are starting to come in this coming season. Nick Bosa's cap number jumps from about 11 million to 18 million next year. Fred Warner from 8 million to 18 million. George Kittle from 7 million to 18 million. And Trent Williams takes a gigantic leap from just under 10 million to over 27 million next year. So it's not impossible to fit in another large contract. It's going to take a lot of conversions and just a lot of creative thinking by the front office, which can certainly happen. But if Jimmy Garoppolo is going to, command $25+ million per season, one, you can say goodbye to players like Jimmy Ward and Mike McGlinchey. I know there'll be Niner fans that aren't worried about Mike McGlinchey moving on. Probably goodbye to, the defensive line depth that they have. There are going to be guys on that defensive line that aren't necessarily starters for the 49ers, that aren't stars, but have played well and are going to be getting contracts from other teams this offseason that the Niners simply won't be able to afford anymore. So I would say, simply because of the money factor and what I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get on the open market, I'd say Trey Lance is still more likely to be the team's quarterback heading into next season. But you do also have to factor in the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo clearly loves it in Santa Clara with the 49ers, and maybe then he would be okay with taking a little bit less money to help the team out if he is still given the opportunity to be the starter. That's certainly a possibility, but I would say that's less likely than him going somewhere else and making more money.
I don't think that money factors into this equation as much as maybe you do.
Interesting.
And the reason being is football teams all the time figure out a way to make the dollars work. And I mean, even look at this year. Jimmy Garoppolo was supposed to be paid some exorbitant amount of money. They restructured his contract to make it work. I don't necessarily believe that. Now, I'm not saying that Jimmy G is going to be on the team, but if the 49ers continue to trend in this direction, which is a playoff appearance, I would assume a playoff victory. You're hoping to get to the conference title game. Obviously, you would love to get to the Super Bowl. With the way that the NFC looks now, and depending on what happens next year, I think there's a better chance that there is a new quarterback not named Trey Lance next year. Now, that also, in addition to Jimmy Garoppolo, could be Tom Brady. That could be Aaron Rodgers. And I think that it's not out of the question that Trey Lance is not unequivocally your starting quarterback next year, because if you make a deep run this year, if you fall just short of the ultimate goal, do you really think that not only the fan base, but just the organization is going to be okay handing the keys to a guy that is coming off of an injury, that has already shown you that he still needs time and needs grooming, but you have a win now roster in a conference that is wide open, that is there for the taking, and that is maybe a quarterback away from you winning a Super Bowl? I don't know if people are going to say that that quarterback is Trey Lance. I'm not saying it's going to be Rodgers. I'm not saying it's going to be Brady. I'm not saying it's going to be Garoppolo. But I would bet that if the 49ers go deep into the playoffs this year and then look at themselves in the offseason, money aside, and are saying we are so freaking close to getting where we need to go, I think Trey might have to wait another year.
I don't think that is too far out of the question. I mean, I just went through some of those numbers, the money for some of those star players, and just forget about what it means for roster construction. Forget about what it means for if they can fit another big number in. Just think about what it means for the team's, I don't know, their ability to compete right now. That money tells you, they're not going to settle next season, and they've proven it this season as well with the acquisition of McCaffrey. They're not going to settle next season for kind of a coin flip with an unproven quarterback. They are all in to win. Their window is right now. Like, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. So when you start to think about next season and even beyond, I think it's certainly obviously way less likely that Trey Lance is the unquestioned number one starter, the presumed starter starting at quarterback, all off season and into the preseason and training camp and all that. I think it's way less likely than it was this past season, obviously. I just don't see it in the cards as much for Jimmy Garoppolo specifically. And, just because I say that it's less likely for Trey Lance this year doesn't mean he won't be. But there's clearly an aura around the 49ers right now that, they're not messing around. I mean, we talked about it when they acquired Christian McCaffrey. They're going all in to win now. And Christian McCaffrey, again, he'll be back next year. His cap number goes up quite a bit as well. That's another name to keep an eye on in terms of how all these numbers fit. But they're not going to, I think, take a random chance on an unproven quarterback, and that's what Trey Lance is at this point, to potentially lead a team that wants to win a Super Bowl. They're going to be much more calculated than that, and that's why I could see what you're talking about. I'm not necessarily too confident that someone like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady is going to be on their way over here, but we will likely see, if it's not Jimmy Garoppolo, we will see the team sign another veteran quarterback. That's almost a given, in my opinion. If it's not Garoppolo, there will be another veteran here, maybe not necessarily the expected starter, but another one here at least to be a decent backup if that's the way the Niners go. But I'm not so sure how I feel about the Brady and Rodgers situation.
I mean, those are just kind of the bigger names. Obviously, Rodgers is feeling disgruntled in Green Bay. Brady, assuming they don't make a playoff run this year, would probably be in a similar situation, even at age 46. I'd feel more confident with that guy than an unproven quarterback. Now, this isn't to say that Trey Lance, look, may have an injury, fantastic summer, blows people away, and he demonstrates behind the scenes that he is capable of becoming a starting caliber quarterback next year. I think those chances are very low. But, I mean, look, Lamar Jackson is going to be a free agent this summer. There are other quarterbacks. There are other quarterbacks that could become available. I mean, who knows? Maybe Matthew Stafford doesn't like what he sees in Los Angeles. And and Kyle Shanahan, who tried to get him before,
There
might
is
try and get.
no chance.
All I'm saying, Mark, is that there are a lot of names out there not named Trey Lance that Kyle Shanahan is going to look at and look hard at because you cannot mess around at this point because you have a chance to win the Super Bowl. And from what we saw this year, I'm sorry, I don't feel confident handing a Ferrari to a 16-year-old. Like that's not what I'm doing at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fair. I think that it's definitely a situation where I think if things continue to progress the way that they are going right now with Jimmy Garoppolo's performance and the team winning games and the team, leading the NFC West, with every win, I think the 49ers desire, and specifically Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch's desire to retain Jimmy Garoppolo increases. The more that he plays like this, clearly, I mean, it's relatively straightforward. The better he plays, the more they want him on their team. But it's also, in my opinion, the less likely it becomes with how well he plays, obviously, because other teams might want him. Other teams might be willing to pay him more. And I know that, teams can be very creative with the money and the cap and they can make things work, but it's unquestionably more difficult. So I think you're kind of stuck in this situation where the better the team performs now, obviously, the more likely you are to want him back, and maybe the more likely you would want to attract a different veteran quarterback if you can't get Garoppolo back. But it also becomes more difficult because of the money situation and of the expectations of the team and all of that. So they're in a uniquely difficult situation. It's a good problem to have ultimately because they're a team that's good and can compete and is ready to compete for a Super Bowl if you plug in the right quarterback. And we still don't know if Trey Lance is that guy, but kind of a unique situation like they were at to start the season with, bringing Jimmy Garoppolo back as the backup. And it'll be a completely different situation this offseason, most likely, but it'll still be equally unique.
Yeah, I guess I just don't necessarily see it as a difficult spot to be in. Like, I mean, right now they're rolling. And right now, I think the 49ers look it. All right. So, what upcoming in a sec, we're going to look at where the 49ers are in the NFC. Actually, let's take a chance to reset right here.